Hello, my name is Nancy Pedro, Family Support Specialist from Uplift, Wyoming's Federation of Families. I am a parent of a young adult daughter who has several challenges and has always had issues with eating. On behalf of Wyoming Family to Family Health Information Center, a collaboration between Wyoming Institute for Disabilities, WIND, and Uplift, we are here today to bring you the presentation, The Importance of Good Nutrition for You and Your Child with Special Health Care Needs. In my job, as I work with families, I run into lots of families who need ideas and suggestions on ways to get their children to eat healthy, to get their children to eat things that are good for them, when often those children with special health care needs have issues with texture, with color, with taste, and often families know that their kids aren't eating a good diet, but they need ideas of ways to get around that. I'm working today with Inette Larson-Meyer, who is a professor here at the university, and she's going to present and help us learn some ways to help our kids get better nutrition.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. It's nice to be here and nice to meet you also in person. And when we started working on this presentation, Nancy and I had a chance to meet each other through email, and Nancy sent me a quote which I thought was really nice and really set the stage for the presentation. And basically, she said a little bit about what she said in introduction, but basically that in her experience, most parents of kids with disabilities know what kind of foods that the kids should eat. They just battle trying to get them to eat anything healthy. So I hope that in my presentation that I can cover some tips for good nutrition, cover what good nutrition is for children, and maybe provide a little bit of help for parents or caregivers of children with special health care needs. So I wanted to start out really and address really why do we care about nutrition? Why should we bother if it can be a struggle and probably can add to the other struggles that parents and caregivers are often going through? Well, nutrition is really important for, and in fact highly tied to growth and development in the brain, as well as development of skeletal muscles, bones, healthy teeth, etc. So it is extremely important in that respect. Good nutrition also enhances well-being in everyone, and this includes just general well-being, which is hard to measure, but also well-being like improving how an individual feels, strengthening their immune system, just a variety of different health aspects. On the other hand, or the flip side, is poor nutrition will increase the risk of a number of different diseases. And usually when we're talking about children, we don't really think so much about children eventually growing up and getting chronic conditions, but in essence they do, and the habits that they establish in childhood can be linked to good nutrition or habits that they form over the lifetime. And we know that poor nutrition actually increases the risk of a number of different chronic diseases, including high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and certain types of cancer. And also what's not listed up there is obesity as well. So with that, what I hope to do, again, is to discuss good nutrition, but I want to take a moment before I start to really talk about the fact that every child that we're talking about is going to be very, very different. It's going to depend on what health condition or disease that the child has, the personality of the child, and the family environment that they live in, and then even the environment of the small town. In Wyoming, certainly very, very different in a rural environment than if we, for example, lived in Denver, quite the metropolitan environment. So when we think about the child, even though I'm going to give some general suggestions, I do always want to go to the fact that every child is going to be, and every situation is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to start out, first of all, and just cover some conditions that influence the nutritional needs that we know of. And this is not meant to really be an extensive list, but really just to give some examples. So a number of different conditions can increase or change appetite, and some can decrease appetite. So two well-known examples listed up there is that the condition Prader-Willi syndrome is known to cause drastic increases in appetite, and that's just part of the condition. Also, with decreased appetite, individuals or kids who are, have attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are on a medication, and as part of the medication, a side effect is suppressed appetite. So those kids often have decreased desire to eat foods, and they need to be fed, for example, or their best time to eat is at the end of the day when their appetite is, when their medicine is wearing off and their appetite is usually a little bit better. Individuals who have severe respiratory distress, including those that have cystic fibrosis or CF, also commonly have decreased appetite. There's also conditions that will directly alter energy needs, either increasing them or decreasing them. And a couple of examples are individuals who have CP or cerebral palsy, or some other neuromuscular conditions where they have an inefficient gait or inefficient movement. They often have higher energy needs than a child without that condition of a similar weight. And then individuals with CP can also have decreased energy needs if they have low muscle tone or other conditions where the muscles are smaller or not as toned as, or just likely to have a nice muscle tone as compared to other kids. And then individuals in a wheelchair or even with having the condition of spina bifida. So you have to really assess energy needs as well as appetite kind of individually as well. Altered fat needs, individuals with cystic fibrosis also might have to watch their fat depending upon whether they're having some malabsorption of fat. And then on the other hand, individuals with seizures, one of the more recent, but I think relatively well-established treatments is to place individuals on an extremely high-fat diet for a short period of time, and that tends to help the seizures. Another example of potentially altered fat needs. And then, as you mentioned, Nancy, is really this increased sensitivity to textures. And we know that this is common in a lot of different conditions. One that it tends to be most noted in, or probably it's most studied, is with the autism spectrum disorder. But certainly you can have this texture sensitivity in a lot of different conditions. So I want to now move on to talking about some of the specific nutrients. And the first one I want to mention is iron. And I want to mention that first of all because iron deficiency is the most common nutrition deficiency worldwide, but it's also quite common in children in the U.S. And iron deficiency iron in itself is very important for normal growth, and that does include the development of the brain. Children who don't get enough iron or iron deficient feel fatigued, very tired, and are less likely to want to play and move around like children should. Sources of iron in the diet are meat, chicken, fish, poultry, eggs, and dried beans and peas, commonly referred to as legumes, nuts, fortified bread, green leafy vegetables. So iron is found in a variety of different foods, but what's interesting about iron is that it is very sensitive to other things in the diet. There are things called promoters that will actually promote the absorption of iron, and those include vitamin C, citric acid, as well as the iron that's found in meat products called heme iron. So if, for example, an individual doesn't or can't tolerate meat, the texture of meat, or doesn't desire to eat meat, legumes can provide an excellent source of iron, but they should be consumed with a promoter of iron, such as vitamin C. There's also factors that strongly inhibit the absorption of iron, and those include some components in tea or sweet tea, also excess fiber. So fiber overall is very good, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, but too much fiber can prevent iron absorption, as can bran supplements, and also high intake of milk or calcium supplements as well. There's also some other nutrients that tend to be missing in the diet of American children, and so I thought it would be good to maybe review those nutrients as well, because certainly it might be very applicable to children with special needs in particular. So this slide actually shows a little clip from an article that was published in 2008, where it basically was highlighting the fact that American children may be missing 5 essential nutrients that are critical to their growth and good health. And it said that coming up short were calcium, magnesium, vitamin E, potassium, and fiber. And that was according to some of the research we're looking at the dietary guidelines for Americans. So I thought we'd take a little bit of time and go through each of these 5 nutrients, talk about what they do and where they're found, and how parents could ensure that their children are getting enough of these nutrients. And the first one is calcium, and probably most of us know that calcium is important for good bones, and it's both calcium as well as vitamin D, which we'll discuss in a minute, and physical activity. But overall, if you don't get adequate calcium, then it's you don't lay down your bone in the early years that you'll need for later on in adulthood. Calcium is actually found in dairy foods. At least it's a pretty readily available source. And 2 to 3 servings of milk or dairy products are needed daily for kids and adolescents. Calcium is also found now nicely in calcium-fortified juices, soy milk, calcium-set tofu, and then also some green leafy vegetables.
Excuse me, Annette, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
With a child who is sensitive to dairy products and maybe also has a soy allergy, is almond milk a good substitute for that?
Yes,
Okay.
Almond milk, and it's nice because now we have a lot more options than we did, 10, 15 years ago. So almond milk, and the majority, as far as I know, are supplemented with calcium. Calcium is added to those. And that's probably the easiest source, because other source that's listed up there, tofu and green leafy vegetables, and even those are great sources for some people. As you know, they're probably much harder for people to consume, particularly children, on a regular basis. And I'm actually really glad you asked that. Sort of leads into the next point, that kids really who are not consuming enough milk for one reason or the other, either they don't like it or they're lactose intolerant, if you can't find a readily available source that the child can consume, like almond milk, then it probably is a good idea to maybe talk to your registered dietitian to find some other suggestions. And that's also because for adults it's pretty easiest for us to recommend a calcium supplement, but that's not recommended in kids. And one of the things that calcium does is that, as we mentioned earlier, it interferes with absorption of iron, but also some other minerals. So it's really preferred that kids get their calcium from food, and if that's not milk, some other source. So I briefly mentioned vitamin D, and this was not one of the missing nutrients, but I stuck it in here. I am a vitamin D researcher, so I'm very interested in vitamin D, but also if you follow the news at all, it's really been, very popular in the media lately. But we've learned a lot about vitamin D, I would say probably over the last 10 years, and it's important for bone, and in fact one of the things that it does is it helps the body absorb calcium. But it's also very important for our immune system as well as muscle function. And if many kids in general, but perhaps kids who are with special health care needs aren't out in the sun as much as they should be, or consuming foods with vitamin D, they may be low in low in vitamin D, and that low vitamin D may be preventing them from absorbing their calcium or preventing them from having adequate muscle function. So it is a potentially very important vitamin. There also, I want to say a little bit about the fact that very few foods contain vitamin D. It is found in vitamin D fortified milk and some other dairy products, fatty fish, but for the most part it's very hard to get from the diet alone. It is called the sunshine vitamin, and that's because our bodies can make vitamin D very quickly with just a little amount of sun. So if children like to be out in the sun, all it takes in the summer months is about 10 to 15 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, at close to solar noon, basically when your shadow is shorter than you, and you can make vitamin D real quickly. And then if you're going to be out in the sun for a long period of time, more than 10 or 15 minutes, then cover up with sunscreen, because we certainly don't want anybody to get increase their risk for skin cancer. But in the winter months here in Wyoming, and it's a good idea for all people, including children, to take a vitamin D supplement. And what's recommended is a supplement. It can be part of a multivitamin, or just a vitamin D supplement by itself specifically for kids that provides at least 800 international units of vitamin D a day. Now this is twice, I want to say this is twice the RDA, but it is the amount that most vitamin D researchers feel will be important to maintain optimal health in kids. So the next nutrient is potassium. And potassium is very important for muscle contraction as well as nerve conductance. And it is a nutrient that's found in a lot of different foods. Predominantly fresh fruits and vegetables, or actually fruits and vegetables in general. It's also found in legumes or dried beans and peas, dairy products, and meat and seafood. And because it's so important to also get fruits and vegetables, the best recommendation for increasing or ensuring adequate potassium is really just to make sure that caregivers provide at least one serving of fruit or vegetable at each meal, and also as a snack. And this will sort of ensure that potassium needs as well as fiber, which we'll talk about in a little bit, are met. Caregivers should, for the most part, strive to provide fruits and vegetables as whole foods, but juice is certainly an easy way to get in potassium and get in fruits and vegetable serving. If the child actually likes that, it's easy to drink the amount of fruits and vegetables. And also I want to say that don't worry, however, whether it's a fruit or a vegetable. And sometimes I find that people get in that argument, well, that's a vegetable, that's not a fruit. And then what's really important is that just getting in fruits and vegetables as a group as much as you can. The next missing nutrient, and I've actually lumped these together, missing nutrients, are magnesium and vitamin E. And they both do very different things in the body, but I've lumped them together really because they're found in similar foods. Magnesium is important for energy generation as well as proper muscle function, and the vitamin E plays an important role at protecting most of the cells of our body. So both are found in whole foods, including whole grains, beans, nuts, seeds, wheat germ, but they're not found in processed foods. So that in and of itself, just thinking of the way that we tend to eat as Americans, probably gives you a clue as to why many American children were low in both of these two nutrients. So again, if you really focus on increasing more whole foods, whole grains, you're likely to meet these two nutrients, magnesium and vitamin E, as well as potassium, as we discussed earlier. Also, just real briefly, vitamin E is also found in many vegetable oils as well. So the last nutrient they mentioned was fiber. And fiber is important because it works along with fluids as well as physical activity to promote normal stool bulk and to prevent constipation. So many children and children with special needs, the one that comes to mind is Down syndrome. They often have lower muscle tone in some of their smooth muscles, so they're more prone to constipation. And then also if they are in a wheelchair or less likely to move, they also may be more prone to constipation. And so thinking about fiber, fluids, and activity together can be very helpful in eliminating constipation or helping to prevent it. So where you find fiber really is in all those fresh fruits and vegetables as well as whole grains. And I also want to take this opportunity to mention that it really doesn't always have to be whole grain. You can look at the label and try for the most part to get whole grains as much as possible, but what's recommended is you get about half of your servings as whole grains. And then so that gives you a little bit more leeway to actually sometimes have some more processed grains like regular pasta, or to also occasionally drink juice, etc. And then, of course, sources of fluid. We all know water is a good source of fluid, but so is 100% fruit juice, some diluted fruit juices, herbal teas, etc. The ones that probably don't contribute very much to increasing fluids or fluid intake are the caffeinated beverages, sodas and coffee, etc. So I want to say a little bit more about physical activity since we mentioned it here with fiber and fluid. And what's recommended is that children actually engage in at least 60 minutes of physical activity every day. And sometimes people get a little shocked by that, but I think if we think back, when you and I were growing up, we actually spent a lot of time outside playing. And in fact, that is more the way that some research are thinking that we should talk about physical activity in kids is to call it play, and that what we should really play outside. This is from a 2006 article that was published in the Chicago Tribune about a study that was published in the Lancet. And that first line, I really like what they say right there. It says, doctors may soon have a prescription for health that even children will like, more playtime. It goes on to talk a little bit about some of the findings that they found in that study, and they were even considering that instead of 60 minutes, that maybe 90 minutes would be better for most kids to promote health, decrease obesity risk, etc. But what's important to mention is that what they say underlined at the bottom of this slide, we don't need to be getting kids running in the gym or on the treadmills, which is sometimes what I think we tend to think about in this day and age. They need to be in organized sports or we need to go to the rec center, but really we need to just get kids out the door and playing, and that it doesn't have to be 60 minutes all at once. It can be first 15 minutes here, 10 minutes there, just adding up to at least 60 minutes a day. And children, as you know, once they get out and play, they tend to just lose themselves and have a wonderful time, providing, of course, the environment is safe. So I want to talk just a little bit more about the benefits of physical activity, or what we're going to call play. And what it does, as I mentioned earlier, it works along with calcium and vitamin D to help promote strong bones, which is important, lifelong, strong muscles, and also helps control body weight and promotes a general sense of well-being. There was a very recently published study that found that children who were more physically active also were less stressed. So certainly the mental health benefits for all children are important as well. Also, establishing physical activity habits, just like good nutrition habits, in childhood is also thought to translate into having better habits later on and then having decreased risk of chronic diseases. The other issue, of course, now that we have a lot more television programs, a lot more TV shows and commercials, is that we also struggle as parents and caregivers with having to give a message that's more interesting than the television. And this is a quote from Irma Bombeck. Most kids won't eat anything that hasn't danced on TV. So certainly, if we can make fruits, vegetables, and whole grains dance on TV, then maybe we can have a bigger impact. But the percentage of overweight and obese children is really growing and continuing to grow at an alarming rate. A lot of things have changed in our environment, which include increased television, as we just mentioned, video games, particularly the sedentary types of video games, and then all of our energy-saving gadgets that we have, leaf blowers and electronic things. Everything is electronic. But what that is really done, according to the 2010 statistics, which is really the most recent statistics from the Center for Disease and Control, is that more than 1/3 of our children and adolescents in general in the U.S. are either overweight or obese. So this is something that we're going to have to consider for all children. There's also some indication that some children with special needs may be at greater risk than children who don't have a particular health condition. And so we need to be, I think, very sensitive to that, both in thinking about getting them to be physically active and then finding ways to prevent them from overeating or making better food choices. So the next thing that I want to talk about is picky eating. And picky eating is really defined very broadly. It's really when a child decides not to eat either in general or certain particular foods that are on potentially a picky eating list. Mm-hmm. Picky eating is common in all children at certain stages of development, but it may be more common in individuals or children with special health care needs, particularly certain conditions, and also can be more evident for longer periods of time than in other kids. So what could be called true picky eating? And in the next slide I'll talk about some other reasons why children may be picky or perceived to be picky. But true picky eating may actually be caused by something called neophobia, which is really a fear of trying new foods. And there are some conditions where children don't like things that are not routine in general, and that could include foods that are not routine and trying new foods. Children can also have what's called hypersensitivity to new foods or new flavors or certain particular flavors or textures in general. And also this sort of links into a sensory processing disorder, really, where they are really overwhelmed by trying certain textures or certain flavors compared to if they really weren't extensively hypersensitive to those particular foods or flavors. Picky eating can also be caused, or it's known to be associated with a number of physical conditions that are listed here. They include autism or autism spectrum disorder, ADD with or without the or attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, cerebral palsy or other neuromuscular conditions, having severe allergies to food as well, and that one sort of makes sense as well. If you're allergic to foods and they look similar to something that you had an allergic attack to, you certainly, might appear to be, picky, to not want to eat those foods. Also, children who have difficulty breathing, issues as well, oral motor disorders or swallowing problems, having gastroesophageal reflux after having certain foods, and also developmental delay. And just want to say a little bit more about developmental delay. Sometimes children who have a slightly delayed development may be perceived to be picky because they aren't developing along what the typical pattern is or what is perceived to be the typical pattern. So the caregiver or the health provider just thinks that the child is picky because they aren't really ready for those particular foods. Picky eating can also be perceived or it can be learned, and another example of perceived is when children experience delayed or slowed growth. Infants and toddlers grow at a pretty rapid rate, and then they usually slow down a little bit in the childhood years. So it may be perceived that suddenly they aren't interested in eating as much as they did before, and that's perceived as picky eating when really it's just that they have like lower energy needs relative to when they were having a growth spurt. Or children can also, all children in general can learn that if they refuse to eat certain foods or become picky about certain situations, that they might get attention, and it also may be a way that they are exerting some control. And so what the parent or caregiver should do in those situations is really not give in and just allow the child to eat something, a treat or a junk food, just to get them to eat or provide energy needs. Sometimes as caregivers we think that we need to constantly feed children, otherwise they're going to starve, but really a child is not likely to starve him or herself, and they may, if they're given excessive amount of attention while they're refusing to eat certain foods or allowed to have a cookie as a treat, then of course everyone would continue to exert that type of behavior. I also have listed down there on the slide just some research that was done at UC San Francisco also suggested that picky eating habits are more likely to develop when parents punish, bribe, or reward their children's eating behavior. So parents should actually look at the whole entire picture and figure out why a child is picky eating before they figure out, what to do and how to handle the picky eating.
And I've known in situations where children have pretty severe needs that their eating is the only thing in their life that they can control. They may use a chair and they get put in and out of the chair. they really have no control over when that happens, how that happens, where they go, anything else. And the only thing they can control is whether they eat or not, or what they eat.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that in those situations that as a parent or caregiver, all you can do is continue to provide good foods and, again, not give in to then replacing good foods with potentially more junkier, less nutritious types of foods, and to just be patient and not make an overly big deal about that, because then if the child they could continue to just be picky in that environment. Yeah, and then of course you have to weigh that against the children that the situations where the children are eating those particular foods and are having that, again, hypersensitive, or it's really making them feel very uncomfortable, and that the foods maybe need to be introduced more slowly than what you would for a child who isn't experiencing that type of behavior. So I'm very glad you brought that up. So I have a couple of suggestions, and I think we've probably already talked about some of them, but these are just some suggestions on what a parent should do. And again, these are suggestions, and I want to go back to the beginning where I said that every child is an individual, and that you really have to look at which one of these suggestions particularly could work. And if none of them really do work or fit the situation, then talking to a healthcare provider, registered dietitian, pediatrician, or the child's another type of physician might be helpful for the parent. But the first one is that really, and this really ties in nicely with what you said, Nancy, the parents are only in charge of what, when, and where to eat. And the child really decides what they're going to eat and how much they're going to eat. And if the child isn't allowed to make a lot of other decisions, then that is the one that the child can make. And maybe in thinking about the big picture, sometimes in working with parents, maybe giving the child other options in addition to food may be one way around that. That may work in some situations. Also, offer foods prepared multiple ways and be patient. There's lots of different ways that you can serve carrots, zucchini. You can serve them raw, you can serve them cooked, steamed, and stir fry. I like for my own children to grate them and hide them. We make cream soups and they'll eat them because there's certain vegetables they won't eat. But if they're creamed, they absolutely either don't know or they don't mind because they don't like the texture of that particular food.
And you can hide a lot of things in spaghetti sauce.
You can. Spaghetti sauce and even smoothies. You can even hide a little bit of spinach in a smoothie, and if they don't see you make it, they won't know it's in there. Yeah, lots of little tricks. The research actually suggests that you may need to offer a food 10 to 15 times, but that's in typical conditions. So there hasn't been a lot of research in children who have some additional health concerns. So maybe it's 30 times. But again, just be patient and continue to offer them, and maybe eventually they will be accepted. And if not, we can hide them in spaghetti sauce and smoothies. Also, teach children good eating habits as you go along, and again, don't be tempted to offer them anything like high-calorie beverages. Sodas are one thing that we tend to forget sometimes, that they provide a lot of calories, and it's not necessarily a food, but that calorie can then make the child a little bit less hungry at a meal. And that goes for other snacks, higher calorie snacks. Tip number 4 is to set a meal schedule and to make meals pleasant. So I think all children do a little bit better when they eat on a regular schedule and when they're not allowed to snack randomly or haphazardly. And if they do snack a lot during the day and then you sit down to a meal, or they don't know when the meal is, they may not be hungry at that meal, and then that's perceived as being picky, and they really just may not be hungry. And also to get kids involved in the preparation of meals. That gives some buy-in. They learn to prepare healthy foods, and they might want to, while they're helping tear lettuce, they might taste the lettuce. So just giving them a lot more opportunities. And I did talk about that a little bit later as well. I also have a picture of DW up there, and there's a lot of interesting children's books that are out there about picky eating. DW is a picky eater. And so reading those books also might be helpful, as well as looking at the fact that other children may not like to taste new foods, whether they're real children or children like DW. And then I love the picture down there in the bottom, and that almost ties back into the making the meals pleasant. If a child doesn't like something and you can't get them to try at least one bite, then to just let it go and to serve it again later, not to make them sit there until they finish that. That never sets up a pleasant environment. So I have a couple of other tips to go on to, and the first one in general is really to get the whole entire family involved as possible, friends, just everybody around, and to learn that eating is really one of life's greatest pleasures. And if a child is struggling eating certain foods or not having the desire to food, then putting the emphasis on eating and you have to try this and why won't you eat that is certainly not pleasant. And that if we tend to just promote good foods overall and we're not always going to like everything, and that the whole family learns to make changes if a child needs to make particular changes in their diet or eating habits, then that's helpful. So the child isn't really the only one doing that. Healthy eating habits and regular exercise should really be part of what the family is doing, incorporating that into family lifestyle. And I know that's not always possible with busy parents and crazy schedules, but as much as possible to get the whole family involved in eating well, and then not overemphasizing issues other than everybody really eating well in general. Getting kids involved in food preparation is also a wonderful way, and I mentioned that earlier, but just want to say a little bit more about that. It helps the child get more buy-in. It helps children contribute to the family and also learn more about the foods that they're eating. And children can really do anything. It really depends, of course, on the age of the child and the condition that they have, that they could sit next to the meal preparer and tear lettuce, for example. They might be able to break up small pieces of fruit, just so many different things that they potentially could do. Peeling carrots is another example, and with some skills like peeling carrots, there's so many different types of peelers that children could have, the small ones and the big ones, to accommodate whatever grip strength they have. And then just little exercises like peeling also could potentially, strengthen some of the muscles in the forearm. Mixing ingredients.
Just things like stirring also gives them a movement that some kids need to work on.
It does.
And yes. Also a sense of the texture and a sense they're always going to try it. The finger's always going to go in whatever they're stirring. So it's a good way to get them to maybe try new foods that they might not, if it was on the table on the plate, they might have tried it in the bowl that they stirred.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I can't really say enough about getting whatever the child can do and helping.
Right. And
you're right. Yeah, we all taste those things. And then another example just up there is rolling cookie balls. As children advance, they can do more and more. And in the picture, just teaching them to do basic measurements, anything like that, any place where the child can help. And if they aren't able to help physically, or even if they are, helping in the menu planning also. Over the summer months when we're not so busy, I usually let each of my 3 kids pick a meal, and they decide what they're going to have with, of course, input. So we're not having chocolate chip cookies and ice cream for dinner, but it gives them a little bit of buy-in, and they feel like they get a choice, and then they have to help prepare that meal. So that's another example as well.
I heard of a fun thing where a mom had written out different kinds of foods that went into dinner. Like she had a stack of certain color cards that had vegetables, and a stack of certain color cards that had the main meal. Mm-hmm. And then her child helped her plan the meal and needed to take one card from each stack. And it gave the child reading and choosing, and lots of different skills went into that. but then the child was way more likely to eat it because they had chosen what was going to be prepared and eaten for that meal.
Oh yes, that's a great idea. And actually I'm going to show the food plate in just a little bit, and that would be a really nice way to do it. Each of the categories on the plate and have the stack and let the child or children, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. I like that a lot. I want to take the opportunity actually to just share some resources that we have available at the University of Wyoming, and we have a great program called Sensible Nutrition, and they have a website where they have a variety of different recipes that are simple, relatively simple, easy to prepare, time savers, as well as nutritious. This particular slide is actually showing some examples of some of their recipes. They're all free, so you can just log on to University of Wyoming, type in Sensible Nutrition Program, and have access to a variety of different recipes. They have, for example, some things like a master mix, where it's like a Bisquick, where you just mix up some master mix, and then at the last minute you can take a certain amount of master mix and mix it with some certain kinds of fruit and make some fruit muffins. So a lot of really nice recipes. A smoothie recipe and a skillet dinner, where it's almost like the cards. They have certain categories, and you pick your grain that you're going to use and your meat you're going to use, which could be meat or beans, etc., and just can easily throw together a skillet stir fry. So I do recommend that source. They also have a lot of other information up there, and actually you'll see right at the top, this is the current website where they recently did some mother-daughter cooking.
What a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you log down, it looks like they even have some tips on picky eating down there too. So this might be a really good source for anybody to check on, caregivers or even kids themselves that are a little bit older who are looking for some recipes.
And we've actually in our community had the Sensible Nutrition trainer do a small group of young adults who had challenges and learned some new foods. We actually had her teach some healthy snacks that they could prepare themselves that were fit into their nutritional needs, and it was really fun.
It sounds like it fun, and I think some of the best ways that you get people involved. You know, you and I can sit here and talk about nutrition all day, but the best way really is to get people doing something, and that's in the kitchen, doing whatever level they're at. And for some people, it's learning how to peel vegetables and how to put a meal together, and and then what more fun than to do it with a group of people. And Sensible Nutrition, if within your community, if you don't know if you have a Sensible Nutrition educator, you can find the contact on the UW website, and they try and have educators across the state that are available to do that for groups of individuals. So I have a picture of the plate up here, and I like the new My Pyramid plate. I think it's much better for those of you who know about the pyramid. It was a little bit harder to follow because we didn't think of our plate as being a pyramid, but if you think about what is on your plate or your child's plate, and then going back to the fact that you can't make your child eat that, but you could certainly provide all of those groups up there on a regular meal all the time, and then eventually, hopefully, even the pickiest eater will eventually start to try some of the foods that maybe they're not used to trying. But the plate really emphasizes that there should be some type of protein, a meat, a bean, a legume, an egg, cottage cheese, etc., a grain, rice, pasta, some of the other grains like quinoa, just bread in and of itself also, and then hopefully a fruit and a vegetable, or if nothing else, one or the other, but certainly doesn't hurt to provide both depending upon what the meal is. And then a dairy product, particularly in children. And remember that children that are really over the age of 9, I didn't say that earlier, but children over the age of 9 need 3 servings of dairy products, or a calcium food a day, and children that are 8 or younger need 2.
Okay.
So thinking about that at every meal, I think the plate is very helpful. Also, if you go to this website, it also has age-specific ideas if parents just want an idea about how to look at a particular plan. Another tip that I have, in addition to the meal planning, is in the summer months, or if a greenhouse is available, to get kids actually involved in the growing of the food. And there's been a lot of interest in doing this lately, and some research has basically suggested, almost just like with cooking, that kids are more likely to eat a vegetable that they've grown themselves or at least been involved growing. That's a picture of my son, and unfortunately that's a tomato, and what it should be is a pepper. He didn't like peppers 2 years ago, and now he was in charge of growing the peppers himself, of course with assistance, and now he is the pepper king. He loves peppers. He takes ownership in the ones that we froze.
Right.
So that's actually fun. And again, kids at different levels, younger kids won't be able to do as much, but they can certainly help shovel and plant, maybe plant the seedlings. And then as they get older into adolescence, they can certainly do more. So also a very nice way to get kids involved. And I think a lot of communities across the state are actually having more community gardens. So you can go and find a small plot and learn to garden with a group of people. And if you don't have, basically land or a small plot yourself, so check out that source in your own community.
And you can often find those little tools that are about the right size for kids, and they love being able to hoe and shovel, and there again it develops muscles and does lots of other things for them besides growing the food.
Absolutely. And I think gardening we could call gardening playing, right?
Yes.
Playing in the dirt and the worms and
exactly.
The last tip I have up there is one that I think everybody knows. It's really just to let all those things that tend to taste good to us, candy, sweet desserts, chips, and other junk food, to let those items be a treat. And one way to avoid eating them is really not to bring them into the house. But if you use them as an opportunity to celebrate something accomplishment that happened, oh, well, let's go out and buy some chips, or let's go out for ice cream, as opposed to having them around, because if they're there and you're hungry, anybody's going to open the refrigerator and say, oh, I might have that, or the cupboard, and children are certainly no different, and we really shouldn't expect them to be. So that is one tip that may be helpful, and also that many kids select these foods that may have little nutritional value over healthier foods, and that's really potentially the problem. So we think of them as being a treat, something we have one or less times a day, then it doesn't deprive people and say, no, you can't have that, but we're going to have that less often, and that you teach your kids why, because those foods really don't provide any nutritional value or very minimum nutritional value, and that what we should be eating is more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, etc. So I wanted to mention that a lot of the tips have been really general, and that there's a lot of different healthcare conditions, and individuals or families who have children that have really special eating issues, growth issues related to food, that they really should consider meeting with a registered dietitian. And those might include, but really aren't limited to, individuals or children who have maybe need special feeding equipment. It's hard for them maybe to eat enough food when they eat themselves, but there are modified utensils that can be purchased, etc. Then something that the family may not know about, if they have to have a feeding tube to supplement what they're eating, is another example. If they have to receive some nutrition through intravenously by an IV, or other examples we've talked about, like extreme picky eating, etc. also might be another example. Also, many children with special health care needs, they do grow a little bit slower than other children. So that's something to also keep in mind too, which is also why the services of a dietitian may be helpful. And to find a registered dietitian, the American Dietetic Association is a great source. The Wyoming Dietetic Association has a number of members in the state, and you can often find those in your area by just checking with your local hospital. But you can also go to the regular site too, and maybe potentially find a registered dietitian if there is
Great.
a need for that.
Great.
And so with that, I don't know if there's any other questions that you can think of, Nancy, that maybe I didn't cover.
I can't think of anything. I think you've covered it very completely. I like your graphic there where it changes from questions to exclamation marks. We'd like to thank you for joining us. Annette, I appreciate all the information that you've provided. I think it's going to be very helpful for parents. For more information on the importance of good nutrition for you and your child with special health care needs, and other health care topics for children with special health care needs, you can visit the Wyoming Family to Family Health Information Center website at www.uwyo.edu/wind/F2F. There's a lot of good information there on a lot of different topics, and it's a good place to go just if you have questions. And we appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.